We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Tesam Beis in Meseches Sotah. This is Sotah Daf 29b. The Gemara is continuing to look for the source that there's a concept of shlishi, meaning tumas shlishi by truma. And so now the Gemara says we can learn it out. Mitzvul yom desheretz, from the case of a tvul yom, that's somebody who immerses again, but he hasn't yet reached the time of sunset, so he's not totally pure. But let's say we're not talking about an avatuma over here. The person is not an av; he's just a rishon l'tuma. He became tameh from a sheretz, and he immerses in it, and he's a tvul yom. And we make the same kal v'chomer. That tvul yom is allowed to have chulin, not allowed to have truma, and so therefore we can make a kal v'chomer when it comes to a kikar that can be a sheni l'chulin. So certainly it can create a psul for truma, that the truma will be a shlishi. Rashi explains, mitvul yom the sheretz, you can have a tvul yom from a sheretz. What does that mean? It means adam shenaga b'sheretz. It means if a person touches a sheretz, so rishon l'tumah, so he's going to be a rishon. V'lo avatuma, he's not going to be an avatuma. That was the reason why we couldn't learn out before, because from the earlier source we brought it was an avatuma. Maybe that's different. But here we're talking about a person that's a rishon. V'chitaval hutter l'chulin v'aser l'truma. And when he immerses and he's a tvul yom, so he's going to be mutter when it comes to chulin, aser for truma, and that's how we make the kal v'chomer, that there's a concept of shlishi by truma. And when we say he's also for truma va'afilu l'negia, that's true even for touching the truma. T'chsiv nami harav shemesh bekelim b'mayim yuva v'tamei ado erev v'toyer v'hal l'negiahu l'shtamish bo truma. That pasuk, that source, is talking about again touching, using truma. The ashminan de kli tvul yom pasale, and we talk about again a kli that's a tvul yom. You can have a vessel that's a tvul yom, and so the same thing is true here by this person. Again, there's going to be a prohibition when he is a tvul yom, a prohibition from truma, and that's how we learn out that there's a concept of shlishi by truma. But the Gemara says, Malat Tvul Yom, you can't learn from there. Because Malat Tvul Yom the Sheretz, because what is unique by a Tvul Yom of Sheretz? At least Shekain B'mino Avatum, at least in that species, there's a concept of Avatum. Rashi says, Shekain Yesh B'mino Avatum, Im Haya Nogea Kli Zeh, O Adam Zeh B'meis, meaning to say as follows, if this vessel that we're talking about, or this person that we're talking about, that touched the Sheretz, in theory, if he would touch a mace, Nasa Avatuma, so a person or a Kli can become an Avatuma, Latame Adam V'Kelim, to make other people and other Kelim Tame. Tomer ba'ocha, whereas over here you're talking about foods, so by foods that's not true. She'eno nasa avatuma. A food can never become an avatuma. Afilu al yedei mace. Even if food would touch a mace, it would not be an avatuma. T'chsiv, as it's written, v'chol asher yiga bo hatame yitzma, u'mehacha nafkalon atame mace, d'metame adam v'kelim, v'al karchach betame mace sheyesh lo tara b'mikvah ksiv. That pasuk that talks about the concept of tame mace, the concept of avatuma, it's talking only about items or people that can go into a mikvah. T'chsiv le'el minei v'hiza atara latame v'rachatz b'mayim, it talks about bathing in water. Davar sheyesh lo tara nasa avatuma, b'maga tame mace, al yedei maga ha-mace, yatzu ochlem u'mashkin, u'chli cheres, she'en lo tara. We exclude from here foods or drinks or klecheres, earthenware vessels. Those cannot be put in a mikvah, and therefore those also cannot become an avatuma. So therefore, again, maybe you can't learn out from tvul yom desheretz, because at least you have the concept of avatuma over there. You don't have that when we're talking about food, and here we're talking about the idea that truma, which is food, can become a shlishi, so maybe that's not a good source. And the Gemara then continues, Kli Cheres Yochiach. So we can talk about Kli Cheres. You're right that most Kalim can become an Avatuma, but as we just said, earthenware vessels cannot become an Avatuma, so they can be the source. Rashi says, Kli Cheres Yochiach, She'ein B'mino Avatuma, because Kli Cheres can never become Avatuma. U'metame es Truma, Kashu Rishon, and they can make the Truma Tame when it's a Rishon, V'kol Shekein Shaposla, certainly to disqualify, Afatal Tatame al Kikor Sheni. So you can learn from Kli Cheres, you can learn to Kikor Sheni. Sha'afa B'She'ein B'mino Avatuma, even though the Kikor Sheni cannot, it's food, it can't be an Avatuma. Yifsol, it also can disqualify Truma. It can also create this concept of a Shlishi, the time alav Avatuma Tali, because here, you can't say that Avatuma is different, because by Kli Cheres, there is no concept of Avatuma. But the Gemara continues, how can you learn from Kli Cheres? Mala Kli Cheres shekei metame me'aviru. Kli Cheres is unique. By earthenware vessels, you don't need contact in order to convey the tumah, in order to transfer, receive the tumah. It can even be from the airspace of a Kli Cheres. So that's unique. So how can you learn from the case of Kli Cheres? And to that the Gemara says, Tvul Yom Yochiach. Well, again, the proof we brought originally from Tvul Yom, that should prove the other way. There's no concept of tumah me'aviro by Tvul Yom. V'chozer adin, and then you go back and forth. You can learn from the combination of the two sources, lo roi zeh karoi zeh, v'lo roi zeh karoi zeh. This one is not similar to this one, and this one is not similar to that one. Hatzara shavish aben. What is the common denominator for learning from Kli Cheres and Tvul Yom in combination? The common denominator is as follows: shemutarin b'chulin, that they are mutter when it comes to chulin, upozlim b'truma, and they create this disqualification by truma, and so therefore we can say kol sheken kikar sheni, certainly by a kikar which is a sheni, sheposel b'chulin, where it's disqualified by chulin, to posel b'truma, that it creates a disqualification of truma, that there's a a concept of a shlishi by truma. And Rashi explains, Hatzara shava shebehen, what is the common denominator? Tzarachat limso chomer shava b'shneim lislos botam psul truma. You have to find something common to say that this is what causes the disqualification of truma. Umau tzara shava shebehen shemetamin tvul yom. What's the tzara shava? Again, that they're metamin tvul yom mikri tameh. They cause tumah. Tvul yom causes tumah. It's called tumah. Tichsivu v'ashemesh v'tar mechlal dar hashta tameh. We refer to it tvul yom as tameh. Ukli cheres ksiv tanur v'krayim yutats tameim hem by kli cheres. Also, it talks about the fact that they're tameh. Uposlim b'truma, and both of them can disqualify truma. V'kol sheken kikar sheni depasel tvei mitvul yom. Certainly a kikar sheni, which is even more disqualified from a tvul yom. Shu tameh v'aser b'chulin, because when you're talking about a kikar sheni, that's tameh and it's aser by chulin. Sheyifsol b'truma. Certainly it should disqualify truma. And again, that's the source that you can have a shlishi by truma. Now Rashi here points out a difficulty in our gear. So v'chol asvarim ksiv atzad hashava shebehen shemuter b'chulin uposel b'truma. In all the svarim, the girsa is that the common denominator is they're both mutter by chulin and they disqualify by truma. Well, she said you can't really explain according to this girsa. Ezo klicheres shemuter b'chulin upsulin b'truma. What do we mean that earthenware vessels are mutter by chulin and puzzle by truma? The original limud that we have from tvul yom, that is the limud. We're saying by a tvul yom it's mutter by chulin and puzzle by truma, and therefore we can learn out a concept of a shlishi by truma. But you really can't say the same kind of logic by klicheres. You don't have a case where it's mutter by chulin and puzzle by truma. Uvidoche gadol yesh lefarish klicheres hamukaf tzamid puzzle. You can have a doche gadol. You can have a very forced answer to talk about klicheres that's completely sealed. Shematzel al chulin shebesocho vein matzel al truma shebesocho. You can say it protects the chulin that are within it, and it doesn't protect the truma. But Rashi says that is a difficult answer. Now Rashi does point out another potential difficulty with the sugya. Uleloshan shepei Rashi says, according to the explanation I gave, al teshiveni mashomer klicheres yochiach. You could say, well, why are we even bringing klicheres in here at all if it's not mutter by chulin? Shahayalo lahavi yochacha bedavar adom l'tvul yom. If you're going to bring a proof, a counter proof, you're going to try to make a tzad hashava, you should bring something similar to the proof we're bringing by tvul yom, meaning something that is mutter by chulin. Sha'afa bishatar l'chulin pasul truma. Isn't the whole point that we're bringing sources that even though they're pure with regards to chulin, they're disqualified by truma? But Rashi says that's not necessarily a refutation. She'ein zu teshuva, that's not necessarily a refutation of bringing in the concept of klicheres. Dein sarach hochacha ela listor teshuvaso shetola tam achum of the psul truma v'neshu avatam. All we really need to bring in the earthenware vessel for is we need to bring it in to show that when it comes to the disqualification of truma, the reason for that chumrah is not because of avatuma. That we bring in klicheres to say that doesn't have this particular stringency, uposel, and it disqualifies. That's all we really need over here. So it's good enough to bring that in, even though it's not something that's mutter by chulin and puzzle by truma. It's good enough to bring in to counter our argument of why we don't have the source from tvul yom. And the Gemara now continues. So the Mishnah said that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said in a future generation they won't agree with this idea that there's a concept of shlishi by truma. And so the Gemara says v'dor acher. So this later generation, why do they not agree with this kind of limud that we have over here from this tzad hashava? No, so parach. So the Gemara says they're going to refute this tzad hashava and say as follows: Malat tzad hashava shebehen sheken yesh ben tzad chomer. The tzad hashava. So at least there's some kind of stringency on each side, even though it's not the same stringency, but each side has some kind of stringency, and maybe that's why we're machmir. And so therefore you can't necessarily say that when it comes to truma, we're going to say there's a concept of shlishi. For Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, but Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai would respond to that later generation, tzad chomer lo parach. You can't ask from a tzad chomer. That's the whole concept of a tzad hashava. You have to try to find the common denominator, and therefore you ultimately will say that there's a concept of shlishi by truma. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a brayso, Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Minayin l'revi b'kodesh apostle. How do we know that when it comes to kodesh, when it comes to things that are hekdesh like karbonos, how do we know that there, the disqualification is even at the fourth level of tumah, that there's a concept of revi b'kodesh? And so the brayso says, Vidina, we can learn it out from the following argument, Ma mechusar kippurim, when it comes to somebody who's tameh, and all he has to do now to make himself completely pure is to bring his carbon, that's a mechusar kippurim, he's lacking atonement. The halach is by mechusar kippurim, if he's gone through all the stages of becoming pure except for the carbon, shem mutter b'truma, so that individual is actually mutter when it comes to truma, but pasul b'kodesh, but when it comes to karbonos, to hekdesh, he's disqualified. So therefore we make the following kal v'chomer, shlishi, when it comes to the shlishi, the third level tumah, shepasul b'truma, as we said, there's a concept of shlishi by truma, eino din hu sheyaser revi b'kodesh. Isn't it logical that there should then be a concept of revi when it comes to kodesh, again, when it comes to hekdesh? And the brayso continues, so according to this, we have the concept of a shlishi by hektish, by kodesh. That's learned from the Torah, or revi mikal v'chomer, and then the concept of a revi by kodesh that we learn from the above kal v'chomer. And so the Gemara says, where do we know shlishi by kodesh mido raisa? The Gemara says shlishi lekodesh min haTorah minol, and from where do we know this concept of shlishi by kodesh? That's learned from the following psukim d'chsiv, because it's written v'habasar asher yiga b'chol tamei lo yochel. It says if you have meat that touched anything tamei, it can't be eaten. And so the Gemara understands that pasuk to mean milo askinon denaga b'sheni. Aren't we talking about over here that this is talking about again hektish? Aren't we talking where it touches a sheni? V'yamar achmona lo yochel. And again the pasuk says not to eat it. So you see a concept of shlishi when it comes to kodesh. And again revi is from a kal v'chomer. Revi mikal v'chomer kida amron. Revi we understand from a kal v'chomer. The kal v'chomer we said above. And Rashi explains, Milo askinon, Milo matzinon lemishma mina. Can we understand from this pasuk that afilu naga b'sheni nami kamer lo yochal, that when we're talking here about the meat of kachim, even if it touches a sheni, it's lo yochal, it can't be eaten. Dehach b'chol tamei ksiv, it says anything tamei. B'sheni ikri tamei, sheni is also called tamei. T'chsiv kol asher b'socho yitma, it says kol asher b'socho yitma, that's the sheni. V'hai b'basar shlomim ksiv, the kodesh ninu. And this pasuk is talking about the meat of shlomim, that's talking about kodesh. So again, we already understand from the Torah that there's a concept of shlishi by kodesh. So if you're making a kal v'chomer, that includes a revi by kodesh. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Tam berivi eini yodea mahu. This reason that the distinguished one, that's Rabbi Yossi in the Bryce above, the reason that he's giving to say that there's a concept of revi by kodesh, I don't understand what that reasoning is. Sharei tshuvaso betzido, because the response is right at its side. We can refute the argument that he's making as follows. Ochel haba machmas tvol yom yochiach. Let's say you have food that's touched by a tvol yom, that should prove that it's not true, that you don't have a concept of revi by kodesh. Shepasul b'truma ve'eno also revi by kodesh, because the halach over there is if you have ochel haba machmas tvol yom, it does in fact disqualify truma, but there is no concept of revi by kodesh in that situation. And Rabbi Yochanan brings the source from the following Brisa, the Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, as follows. Abashol Omer Abashol says, Tvul Yom, if you have somebody who immersed that day in a mikveh, again, that's somebody who immersed from his impurity, he's waiting for the sun to set, for the end of the day, for him to become totally pure. So the halach is he has a status of tchila, he has a status of a rishon, he's considered tumah, he's considered tameh at the level of rishon. Tchila la kodesh letame shnayim v'lifso lechet. And when you're talking about items that are kodesh, he can actually impart 2 levels of tumah and then 1 more level of disqualification. In other words, he can create a sheni and create a shlishi, and also finally create a revi. That's the opinion of Abba Shol. Rabbi Meir says no, that's not true. It doesn't go that far. Mitame echad uposel echad. He can create another level, meaning a level of sheni, and which then can create another level, which is a level of shlishi, but it stops at the level of shlishi. But the Chachamim say, Kashem sheposel ochle truma umashki truma, just like he disqualifies the ochle truma and the mashke truma, kach posel ochle kodesh umashke kodesh, so too when it comes to food of kodesh and drinks of kodesh, he only creates a disqualification, meaning to say it only goes 1 level and it doesn't go any further. That's the opinion of the Chachamim. But the Gemara continues, Ma'askef lo Rapapa. So Rapapa asks on this question that Rabbi Yochanan is asking, you're bringing a question from the Chachamim in this Brisa. Mimaid Rabbi Yossi, Rabbanan Svirle. How do you even know that Rabbi Yossi is following the Rabbanan? Dil Makabba Shol Svirle. Maybe he follows the opinion of Abba Shol. Abba Shol by Tvul Yom clearly says it does go to the 4th level. Diamar Latame Shnayim V'Lifsol Echad. He says it makes two more levels of Tumah and then 1 more level of disqualification after that. We should clarify that when we talk about levels of Tumah, that means the item is Tameh to make something else Tameh. That's why it's 2 levels of Tumah, meaning Sheni and Shlishi, and it can then go to a 4th level. That 4th level is Puzzle. It's disqualified, but it can't go any further than that. That's why it's referred to as puzzle. So the point is maybe he holds like Abba Shol. But the Gemara says, no, it can't be. If you think that Rabbi Yossi follows the opinion of Abba Shol, so Laisi l'Ravi Bakodesh me'ochel sheba machmas tvul yom. Then he could have brought his source for the concept of Ravi by Kodesh from this case of an ochel that comes from a tvul yom. Uma ochel haba machmas tvul yom. If you have an ochel that comes from a tvul yom, a food that comes in contact with a tvul yom, the tvul yom gufei mutter b'chulin. Now the Tvul Yom himself can have chulin. That happens to be the halacha we quoted above. A Tvul Yom is pure enough to have chulin. And Amir Osa Revi b'kodesh, and you say there's an idea of Revi by kodesh, so ochel, so when it comes to a food item, and we will take a look at Rashi's explanation of Rabbi Yochanan's argument, Tam Berivi, again Rabbi Yochanan says, the reason of the distinguished one, Taimo Shel Rabbi Yossi, meaning the reason of Rabbi Yossi, Shu Chacham v'Gadol Hador, he's the Chacham and he's the Gadol Hador, Eini Yodea Mao, I don't understand what his reasoning is. Shalama Revi Bakodesh, Shaharei Mikal v'Chomer Zet, Shuvasu Betzido. He learns this idea of a Revi Bakodesh, but there's the refutation, we have this refutation from the following, and again Rabbi Yochanan brings the following brisa. And Rashi continues, Ochel haba machmas tvul yom. Let's say you have a situation of a food that becomes tameh because of a tvul yom, meaning this food shenaga b'tvul yom. The case over here that the Bryce is dealing with is you have some food that touched a tvul yom. Again, that's a person who immersed and he's waiting for sunset. He's pure, but he's not totally pure. V'hu shel kodesh o shel truma. Now the case could be either this item, this food that touches the tvul yom is kodesh, or maybe it's truma. Yochiach, that should prove the other way. Shepasul b'truma min haTorah kedeforishas la'el. So that is disqualified according to the Torah, as I explained earlier. The v'kelim nami ksiv hariv shemesh l'gabe truma, because by kelim also we have this concept of hariv shemesh when it comes to truma. V'yeno elul l'negia, and it's talking about again touching. V'yeno osa revi bakodesh l'rabbanan to pligi oled to abashol, and as we're going to see again, as the Brisa says, according to the Rabbanan, in this situation you don't have a level of revi by kodesh. V'yamru tvul yom posel b'kodesh ve'eno metame lifsol es misha yachzor v'yigabo. What it means to say again is that the tvul yom creates this disqualification by kodesh, but it's not at the level of metame, meaning to say it can't be metame others, it can't disqualify the next level. And Rashi explains, "V'kasalka da'ita the Rabbi Yossi k'Rabbanan Tzirulei." Right now we think that Rabbi Yossi is going to follow the opinion of the Rabbanan in this brisa. Hilkach teshuvaso betzido, and therefore we have a refutation right here against Rabbi Yossi. Because if you're going to make the kal v'chomer that Rabbi Yossi made in order to have the concept of Revi by Kodesh, so you should make it over here also. Sheyifsol ochel haba machmas tvul yom es hakodesh. We should say that if you have ochel that becomes tameh because of the tvul yom, it should disqualify the Kodesh to that level, and we should make the same kal v'chomer that Rabbi Yossi made. Umam mechusar kippurim shemuter b'truma pasul b'kodesh. We'll say if by a mechusar kippurim, which is muter by truma, is disqualified by kodesh, so again we'll say ochel hanogeya b'tvul yom shepasul b'truma. So if you have food that touches a tvul yom that again is disqualified by truma, dinu sheyasa revi b'kodesh. Isn't it logical that it should be a revi when it comes to kodesh? And Rashi continues now and explains the first opinion in the Brisa. So this was the opinion of Abba Shaul, tvul yom techilal hakodesh. So Abba Shaul says that a tvul yom is considered a rishon when it comes to Kodesh. Now this Rashi explains as follows. Maila asu b'Kodesh means to say there's a special kind of stringency that we say by Kodesh. Lios tvul yom etzlo kirishon l'tuma, that when it comes to a tvul yom, with regards to Kodesh, we consider the tvul yom to be at the level of a rishon l'tuma. V'yit masheni b'Kodesh zeh mizeh she'ochel shenogeya b'tvul yom. So now let's say you have food that touches the tvul yom, so it's going to be the level of a sheni. That's the stringency that the tvul yom himself is going to be considered, or the tvul yom itself is going to be considered a sheni, and the ochel is going to be considered a rishon rather, and the ochel that touches it is a sheni, na'as a sheni, v'yoses chaver shlishi, and then it can make the next one to be a shlishi, u'shneihem kruyin tmein, and both of those are called tmein, and again tmein means it's able to disqualify to another level, shemekalklin es acherim, that it can disqualify others, v'ashlishi posel es revi liyosu atzmo pasel, and the shlishi then disqualifies the revi is now pasel. Avalo yifsol es acherim imago, but it doesn't go further than revi. The revi is disqualified, but it can't make others disqualified. So that's the opinion of Abba Shaul. So Abba Shaul essentially says by tvul yom that it's a rishon, and there is revi by kodesh. And Rashi continues, Rabbi Meir Omer Metame Echad Uposel Echad. The next opinion in the Brisa was the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Now the simple reading of Rabbi Meir of Metame Echad Uposel Echad is that it only goes down to the level of Shlishi, meaning it becomes a Sheni, Metame, and then the next level Shlishi, that he's not saying that there's a Revi Bakodesh. However, Rashi offers another explanation of Rabbi Meir, Harehu Kashar Sheni. What it really means over here is the Tvul Yom is considered a Sheni, meaning to say, according to Abba Shaul, the Tvul Yom is considered a Rishon, and it goes all the way down to Revi. What Rabbi Meir is disputing is he's saying the Tvul Yom is considered a Sheni, but it still goes down to the level of Revi. The Sheni creates a Shlishi, which creates a Revi. Harehu kashar sheni sheposel es truma. Again, that's like a sheni that disqualifies truma to a shlishi level. Hanogea bo posel es kodesh, and then by kodesh, it's going to go to a revi level. Kach tvul yom haposel es truma, so to a tvul yom that disqualifies truma. Hanogea bo tamei lakodesh v'lif solor acher. Again, touches it, it's going to be tamei lakodesh, meaning to say it's going to go to a fourth level when it comes to kodesh. Again, the simple reading of Reb Meir, it may not have suggested that Reb Meir was saying by tvul yom that it goes all the way to the level of revi, but Rashi understands Reb Meir is also saying it goes to the level of revi. And then the Chachamim, their statement was Keshem sheposel ochle truma mashke truma kach posel ochle kodesh umashke kodesh, that it disqualifies truma and disqualifies kodesh, meaning they're saying it does not go to the level of revi. Rashi over here says kach posel ve'ein hanogeh b'tvul yom posel as hakodesh elohu atzmo posel, meaning if it touches the tvul yom, it's not going to disqualify the kodesh. Only it itself will be puzzle. And again, what that means to say is when you have this tvul yom, so you're going to have a situation over here where it's only going to go to the level of shlishi, but it is not going to go beyond. And again, here as well, within the opinion of the Chachamim, if you just read the Chachamim, Keshem sheposel ochle truma, umashke truma kach posel ochle kodesh, umashke kodesh, you could have assumed that it meant only to the level of sheni, but that is not the case, because again, as Rashi has explained, we're assuming here, within both Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, that the tvul yom is actually considered a sheni, and so therefore it's actually getting to the level of shlishi, but it is not going beyond the level of shlishi, according to the Chachamim, and that was the question that Rabbi Yochanan is asking on Rabbi Yossi. And so then the Gemara responds, "Mimaid Rabbi Yossi k'Rabbanan svirle." But how do you know that Rabbi Yossi is even following the Rabbanan? That to have it teshuva b'tzido, because then you actually would have a refutation. But maybe he doesn't follow the opinion of the Rabbanan. Dilma kabashol svirle. Maybe he follows the opinion of Abba Shol. Now Rashi notes over here, "V'hu adin to have a matzir Rav Papa l'meimer Dilma Rabbi Meir svirle." The truth is, Rav Papa could have said that Rabbi Yossi might follow Rabbi Meir, because as we just explained within Rashi's explanation, according to Rabbi Meir, it actually reaches the level of revi also by kodesh, and so therefore you could follow Rabbi Meir. V'yein kan od tshuva, and then there wouldn't be a refutation of it revi, because again there is revi according to both Abba Shol and Rabbi Meir. Elari busa naka, but what we're just saying over here is we're saying the greater chiddush. Kilomar man leimalon delo machmer ka'Abba Shol dilma kavase svirales. In other words, who says maybe he goes so far that he's even as strict as Abba Shol? How do you know? The ochel abba machmas tvul yom. When you have an ochel that touches a tvul yom, im shel kodeshu metame echad uposel echad. In other words, we're saying in that situation it's going to be metame one level and then disqualified to another level. Dahu denaga be posel le doraisa, that which touches it is posel on a doraisa level. Ve'afilu have a kamot truma, and even if the first thing that touches is truma, pasal kodesh, it's going to disqualify for kodesh. Mikal v'chomer mimichusar kippurim, again from that same kal v'chomer from mechusar kippurim. Kedidarish Rabbi Yossi leil, like Rabbi Yossi darshaned earlier. V'darish leinami hachi, you'll make the exact same drush over here. Rabbi Yossi will agree with this position over here, according to the opinion of Abba Shol. Umam mechusar kippurim shemuter b'truma pasal kodesh, just like a mechusar kippurim who can have trumas disqualified for kodesh. Ochel truma haba machmas tvul yom, if you have food of truma that became disqualified because of a tvul yom, sheposel b'truma, that it's at the level of disqualification by truma, meaning at the level of shlishi. And you know, dinu sheyaser revi by kodesh. Certainly there should be revi by kodesh. Ve'echad havelei the kodesh avad rabbanan maila sheyitma echad v'yifsol echad. And when you have a situation of kodesh, the rabbanan have this stringency that it's at the level, again, one level tamei and then one level disqualified. And again, Rashi over here is following the stringency of Abba Shol, that when it comes to kodesh, we actually consider the tvul yom not to be a sheni, but the tvul yom is even considered to be a rishon, so therefore it's considered to be a rishon. Then the kodesh, when you're talking about kodesh, it touches the tvul yom, that's going to be a sheni, that's going to create another level of shlishi, and then another level of revi. And Rashi continues, and again, the Gemara had responded, it cannot be that Rabbi Yossi follows Abba Shol, the isalka daitach k'Abba Shol, svirle, because if you think that Rabbi Yossi follows the opinion of Abba Shol, meaning to say, mikal v'chomer de mechusar kippurim, from the kal v'chomer mechusar kippurim, pasal l'kama, so then it disqualifies the first one. Again, what that means to say is, let's say you have a food item that touches a tvul yom, so on a doraisa level, so it's considered to be a shlishi, and then it's going to touch something else, it's going to make it a revi on a doraisa level. Umimayla derabanan mitamele. Now on a derabanan level, again, we have this chumrah that the tvul yom is considered a rishon, the food that touches the tvul yom is considered to be actually a sheni, that's a derabanan chumrah, and so therefore that food that touches the tvul yom can now create a shlishi, which then creates a revi, and that's all true by kodesh. So kevan de midoraisa pasale lahu de naga be. So since on a doraisa doraisa level, forgetting about the chumrah of the rabbanon, but on a doraisa level, again, the tvul yom is considered a sheni, and on a doraisa level, the kodesh that touches is a shlishi, and it can create a revi. So if that's true, laisi l'revi b'kodesh me'ochel haba machmas tvul yom. You can learn out the concept of revi by kodesh from the case of ochel haba machmas tvul yom as follows: Uma'ochel haba machmas tvul yom, the tvul yom sheba mikocho shari b'chulin. If you have a situation of food, again, that becomes tummy because it touches the tvul yom, and the tvul yom which it's coming from, the tvul yom himself is allowed to have chulin. Osa revi by kodesh, and yet the tvul yom can create this revi by kodesh, because we consider again the tvul yom to be a sheni, which creates a shlishi, which creates a revi, and that all happens on a doraisa level. Kolomar posel as a kodesh, again, disqualifies the kodesh on a revi level, mikal v'chomer mechusar kippurim, from a kal v'chomer from mechusar kippurim. And so again, the Gemara will go on to say it should certainly be true in a situation of a shlishi that comes from a sheni, that certainly should be able to create a revi by kodesh, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Amud Aleph.